Thank you for joining our today's panel. My name is Ebubekir. I work as a policy analyst for Vocal Europe. For those of you who don't know about Vocal Europe, let me say a few words. Vocal Europe is an independent Brussels-based think tank. We basically work on EU's relations with countries like Russia, Israel, Iran, Turkey, and Western Balkans. Through research, communication campaign, policy events, we try to not only contribute but also challenge all relevant EU decision makers to really make sure that there are informed decisions at all levels, and also we try to provide platforms for engaging partners and stakeholders. And today, as within the framework of our Beyond Europe program, research program, we have an excellent panel of speakers to discuss whether or not the European Union can remain connected to Turkey under the current circumstances. And at the end of the day, this is really not something that one side, even if it sincerely wants, can achieve on its own. And it seems that we have a number of reasons that emerged recently to re-debate this never-ending story between the European Union and Turkey. And therefore, let me make the following remarks. First, the European Parliament, I think 2 weeks ago, Foreign Affairs Committee, called on the European Commission and member states to formally suspend EU accession negotiations with Turkey because of Turkey's very negative, I would say, record in various areas, particularly the ones about rule of law and human rights. And secondly, we are 3 weeks away from the local elections in Turkey, which will end a long cycle of elections in Turkey for some time, and therefore many candidates in Turkey, but also around Turkey, also here in Brussels, are in opinion that this is maybe the very last chance to put Turkey back on track as a member of European family, if and when the opposition in the country could act all together. Third, maybe finally, we are also heading towards the European elections in late May 2019, after which we might see some maybe bolder attempts to redesign the current framework of the relations between Ankara and Brussels. In fact, all these developments force us to rethink and redebate again, not only the current state of relations between both parties, but also, and I think more importantly, to envisage what type of relations that the both sides are going to have in the coming future. That being said, personally, I think we should all hope that the both sides will show resilience despite all challenges to keep current and official format of the relations. And yes, to discuss all these matters today, I am extremely delighted to introduce you an excellent panel of speakers. To my right, we have Mr. Geoffrey van Orden, who is a member of European Parliament. Mr. van Orden is the Vice Chair of European Conservatives and Reformists Group, and he is a well-known MEP who has vast experience and knowledge on matters related to Turkey. And if I may, among many of his former military duties, Mr. van Orden was head of British military intelligence staff in Germany when the Berlin Wall, I think, fell. And his last military appointment was at NATO headquarters in Brussels, where he headed the Secretariat of International Military Staff. We are pleased to have you, Mr. van Orden. Thank you so much. To my left, I have Mr. Takis Hadjigeorgiou, who is a member of European Parliament, and he is the Vice Chair of EP Delegation to the EUTurkey Joint Parliamentary Committee. Mr. Hadjigeorgiou, for those of you who know him already, is someone who is very much, I would say, into both internal and as well as foreign affairs matters related to Turkey. And good to have you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. And also, I'm very pleased to have Mr. Cengiz Aktar to my far right, I would say, who is a professor of political science at the University of Athens and a columnist for Ahval. Mr. Aktar had a long professional experience at the United Nations as well, from 1994 to 1999, if I am not mistaken. He was the head of the United Nations mission in Slovenia. And I'm very pleased to have you today, Mr. Aktar. Thank you so much. And my dear friend, I'm also personally very much delighted to have Stephen Blockmans. Stephen is head of foreign policy unit at Center for European Policy Studies. Also, he is a professor of EU external relations, law and governance at the University of Amsterdam. If any of you read several good papers on Turkey or EU foreign affairs, I am sure at least one of them is written by him. So thank you so much for having me. And finally, we are also delighted to have Ms. Sarah Lambert, who is a political officer in the Turkey unit of the European Commission's DG NEAR. And before joining DG NEAR in 2018, Ms. Lambert worked for the European Commission in London and in Madrid. So before the kickoff, let me briefly mention about the format of the panel. Each speaker will have around 7-8 minutes speaking time, and we will have 2 rather long sessions of Q&A, where I am personally expecting the audience to pepper the panelists with their questions. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Lambert. Ms. Lambert, could you tell us about the most challenging and of course current, I would say, problems between Brussels and Ankara, and maybe more interestingly, why the problems facing the EU-Turkey relations have been deepening each and every single year since 2013 and peaked in 2016 following the coup attempt that was initiated against Turkish government and against President Erdogan? Why the relations are really deepening bad and bad? May I just... Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think perhaps most usefully being the first speaker, I can lay out a little bit our current position, because that is, I think, what will condition movement moving forward. As you know, Turkey is a candidate country, and the accession negotiations are currently effectively frozen. This is because the member states, looking at the Commission's April 2018 report on progress in Turkey, decided that Turkey was moving away from the EU. It noted in particular, this is the General Affairs Council, the worrying backsliding in all the core fundamental areas which are rule of law, independence of the judiciary, human rights, and concluded on the basis of that negotiations, as I say, would be effectively frozen, that there could be no opening or closing of chapters, and no further work on the modernisation of the customs union. So that's where we currently are. And for that position to change, member states, that is to say Council, would need to see progress on the areas that they have outlined as being particularly worrisome. Notwithstanding, Turkey remains an important strategic partner for the EU. And our relationship is framed both by the accession process, which I've just outlined, but also by the association agreement and its customs union. And this provides a very, very useful framework for our continued debate and dialogue with Turkey. And there are many issues on which we have a common objectives. I'm thinking here migration particularly, but the security situation, energy, environment, transport. And so it is that through this institutional framework, we are able to maintain open and useful dialogue with the Turkish authorities. Last November, for example, the High Representative, Federica Mogherini, together with Commissioner Hahn, who is responsible for the Turkey, or indeed the enlargement file, went to Ankara and met there their Turkish counterparts. And that is where we have useful and very frank discussions on a wide range of topics, both internal bilaterals, but also the security situation and more generally the region in which Turkey sits. Then last week only there was a high-level economic dialogue in Istanbul. We had high-level transport in January, and we hope for high-level energy soon. And most importantly, there will be an association council on the 15th of March here in Brussels. So this is the framework by which we continue to talk to Turkey and to try and put forward our views, particularly on the reform agenda, the kind of reforms we would like to see, most particularly of the judiciary, and that's where our relationship currently is. As I say, the Commission, and I speak for the Commission, we're directed by member states. So I think the change for the future will come very much from a member state's understanding of progress on the ground in Turkey. That's all I want to say.
All right, thank you so much. As we will do a Q&A session after each and every single speech, I would say, I would like to ask, is there any question to Ms. Lambert you would like to ask? Stephanie, please. We could hear you, I think. You could just ask your question, yes.
Okay, so I'm Stephanie Lezen, I'm a researcher at Vocal Europe, and I wrote a paper that some of you have together with Mr. Isik. And as we say in the paper, after the failed coup attempt of 2016, when the civil society organizations have been closed down and many civil society professionals have been dismissed, and the IPA funds, the pre-accession assistance that the EU gives to Turkey as an official candidate country, right now part of that IPA funding is given to support existing civil society in Turkey. But my question is, what is the position of the European Commission on the possibility of broadening the scope of the IPA funding, and so that it would also assist and target those professionals who have been dismissed and cannot currently work in Turkey? So
please.
The IPA funding hasn't been substantially cut, and we have ensured that it will go to civil society primarily. And we're looking now at where that funding, what kind of projects that funding goes to.
All right, I will now give the floor to Mr. Van Orden, and if I may, Mr. Van Orden, I would like to put you the following question. Well, how do you see the future of the EU-Turkey relations? Are we in a transition where the relations between Ankara and Brussels is turning into purely transactional, where we will cooperate on certain matters and we will just forget about the current, I would say, official framework, which is accession negotiations? Please, sir.
Well, maybe a transactional relationship is what all countries should be looking for with the European Union. Let's just put this relationship with Turkey in a context, if you like. I mean, this has been going on now for the last 30 or 40 years. In a way, this current relationship sort of suits both sides. I always say the EU pretends it wants Turkey to join the European Union, and Turkey pretends that it wants to join. And there's this sort of elaborate pretense. I think it's very unlikely that Turkey will join the European Union as a regular member of the European Union. And yet, having that ambition, certainly as far as the Turkish authorities are concerned, it's very useful in terms of domestic policy, aspirations, discipline in terms of things that need to be done in order to modernize many aspects of Turkish society. And on the EU side, of course, Turkey is a very important strategic partner, and Turkey needs to remain close from an EU perspective. When I say that I don't think Turkey ever will become a full member, I say that because we have to look at what's happening in the EU at the moment, and particularly with Brexit. We see those that want to see a very integrated European state are coming to the fore. They see their opportunity now. The United Kingdom, they saw as a sort of break on this aspiration. Now is an opportunity to push full steam ahead with European political integration driven by German and French ideas about the European model. Now, it remains to be seen whether that model is going to suit everybody else, but this is the direction of travel at the moment. And we're already seeing, in terms of foreign policy and defence policy, a very hard push for greater integration on the EU side. So if they're trying desperately now to create a more state-like entity in the European Union, then a country like Turkey becomes even more indigestible in that particular model. I can't imagine Germany really accepting that a country that would have a bigger population than Germany, that would have more MEPs than Germany, should suddenly be introduced into the European structures. This would totally distort the long-standing model which Germans and the French have had in mind. So I think this underlines, I mean, this is the sort of aspect of the thing which people really don't want to talk about. But I think this underlies all the other difficulties difficulties. Now, on the way, of course, we see all sorts of problems that are raised and objections that are raised as far as Turkish membership is concerned. I mean, the goalposts keep moving. Every time Turkey appears to be fulfilling one set of objectives, then there are difficulties that are raised in another area. And we've seen this all along. And of course, we talk about human rights problems, and one thinks in particular of the Cyprus dispute, which should be regarded as separate, but nevertheless this is regarded as a major obstacle to Turkish accession. And I suspect that people don't want to resolve the Cyprus problem, because it is a very convenient obstacle to that bigger thing, which is Turkish accession. So the goalposts keep moving for the reasons that I've said, because actually they don't really want Turkey to become a full member. And I think people in Turkey are sufficiently mature and long-headed to really understand this in their hearts. And so a more pragmatic relationship between Turkey and the European Union is really something that people should be working towards. I mean, at the moment there's a trade deficit in the EU's favour of about 15 billion a year. It is enormously to the EU's advantage to have this current customs union arrangement. Yes, there are some discussions which have been ongoing to improve that relationship. But we see how difficult it is negotiating with the European Union when it thinks it has all the cards in its hands. And I wonder whether that's actually true, because the prize of having a close relationship with Turkey is actually enormous. First of all, of course, one could overcome the division of the island of Cyprus if there was some goodwill to move in that direction. And I think the European Union has been neglectful in not doing more to bring about unity on the island of Cyprus. It could have done more, but instead it slavishly followed what the Republic of Cyprus has required in that particular respect. Turkey is a very important, not only strategic buffer, but also alternative route for oil and gas, particularly coming from the Caspian Basin into Europe, avoiding the Russian route. And I think this is a very important future objective. A good relationship with Turkey and improvement in the situation in Cyprus, of course, would open up oil and gas possibilities in the Eastern Mediterranean. At the moment there are great difficulties. There is a prize then to be won by having a greatly improved relationship with Turkey, and I think it's in all of our interests for that to happen. And what I would say, as far as the Turkish authorities are concerned, is I'd be working towards a more transactional relationship instead of looking for this all-encompassing answer that one should deal piece by piece on all of these things and try and make progress in particular areas. And I think that's the way forward. And I very much hope in the future that the United Kingdom and Turkey will have a very strong relationship, two countries that are outside of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Van Orden. And I will just move forward towards Mr. Hadjigeorgiou. In February this year, European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, as I said in my introduction, called the European Commission, but also the Member State, to suspend the accession talks with Turkey. Is this a general feeling also at the EUTurkey Joint Parliamentary Committee, of which you are the Vice Chair? What is your take on that, please?
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I see a lot of friends around. Let me first say that I have two things to underline at the very beginning. The first one is that I always try to speak to speak in the way I think, avoiding a diplomatic language. And that's what I'm going to do even now. But I have also an obstacle coming from Cyprus, a country which partly is occupied by Turkey, gives to the audience the feeling that a Cypriot is always prejudiced towards Turkey, which is not the case for me. I always try to see the things deeply and to understand what someone who is thinking in a different way than me, I try always to understand why and the reasons she thinks so. For me, the main problem for Turkey is the fact that this country cannot perceive, cannot handle its size and its power. It's a very big country. Mr. Erdogan especially thinks that he has to behave as a very big country, and that doesn't help him or even his country to be accepted by the surrounding area and by Europe. That's what Mr. Van Orden already said in a different way. He referred to the fact that Germany and France doesn't like to see a country which has more population than them to be member, and that is more than obvious. For years, I think that for Turkey and for Cyprus, it was a dream to see Turkey entering European Union. For Turkey, because it was for their benefit to be member, and for Cyprus because we were thinking that through the accession and through the accession we would also solve the Cyprus issue. This is not the situation we face today, and yes, the atmosphere and the feeling among the members of the Joint Parliamentary Committee between Turkey and European Union, yes, it is highly negative towards Turkey, especially right now, watching what goes on, especially in the area of the human rights and the abuse of the human rights in Turkey. Now, yes, Turkey pretends, as Mr. Van Orden put it, that they think that one day they will be member. And yes, some European countries behave and work and pretend that they want Turkey to be member. But both of them, both sides, needs the procedure. And that's policy. And that's politics. And I can understand why, let's put it that way, we need this procedure to be alive. It would be very, very negative development if these two sides decide to move in different directions. And I can understand why, especially Greece and Cyprus cannot decide to be the first to say, this is the end. There is no way, and we put an end. It's very, very difficult, especially for them, to decide so. So we as a group, we didn't support the idea of terminating the negotiations with Turkey. On the other hand, personally, and I'm coming now on what I said at the beginning, that I never talk in a very diplomatic way. Personally, I was thinking days and nights that since there is no future, and since Turkey behaves the way she does, maybe it would be a better idea, and maybe it was better policy to put an end and say that goes nowhere, and put them not in the corner. I don't want to say that, put them in the place we want them to see themselves, to make them rethink what is the future of our country, I mean Turkey, and to give food for thought for the people who maybe support Erdogan or maybe are against him, but they are balancing, to give to them food of thought and think this thing happened, I mean determination, because of our behavior towards our people, towards Kurdish people, which is their people too, and towards other countries in the surrounding area, mainly Syria or Cyprus or some others. I'm coming now on the issue of the hydrocarbons. And yes, I can say that I still see that as a tool for cooperation. According to my knowledge, the quantities only Cyprus found, and I don't add to that the amounts of hydrocarbons which Israel or Egypt have found in their exclusive economic zone. According to my knowledge, if we try to cooperate with Turkey and to sell to them, it would be a diversification of the resources for Turkey, and Europe likes that. So these quantities may serve the 20% of the needs of Turkey for more than a decade, which is something. And I believe that solving the Cyprus issue, the Cyprus government and the opposition will support the idea of having a pipeline through Cyprus to Turkey.
That's 3 minutes.
I have more 3 minutes, you said, or I see.
That's 3 minutes, I would say.
Okay. Well, on the Cyprus issue, a final word. Some people started thinking of a two-state solution. And I heard that even from some Turkish official lips. I want to say on that there is no Cypriot, a Turkish Cypriot or a Greek Cypriot, who can take a pen to sign such a solution, even if he believes it's a better one. So we have to forget it. The only solution we can achieve is federation, I believe that is still an alive possibility. Both sides have to rethink on that and to sit again on the same table, meaning that they want that time to reach a solution, a just one, and a solution which will give to everybody the feeling that we are safe. Thank you.
So now I will open the floor for Q&A session, particularly for Mr. Van Orden and Mr. Hadjigeorgiou. So if you have any questions, please just raise your hand and tell us your affiliation. Please.
So, my name is Lambert. I'm a professor, but I was secretary of state in Romania, working on the judicial area, and I also was a political director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania. I used to work a lot with Turkey. I even worked for 2 months in Ankara, meeting people, senior officials and less senior officials, working on European affairs. So actually I was quite impressed, because these people are, well, they are keen and they are working on European affairs. But I know that the situation is very complex. There are a lot of political issues, like EU institutional level, European Court of Human Rights, and so on. So my question is, well, because Mr. Van Orden said about putting Turkey in context. I'm just wondering if, assuming that the renewal of Europe, the idea of President Macron will eventually become a reality, if there are any chance for Turkey to, well, become a member of the EU. Of course, taking into account a lot of, work from Turkey. Thank you.
So your question was to Mr. Van Orden, right?
Yeah, and also to Mrs. Sarah Lambert, because she also said that all is depending on the EU willingness of United States perception of Turkey evolution.
And if we could pick up some other questions, if you have any other question, please.
My name is Hassan. I'm giving consultancy services for the business people. I have two questions, if I may, and my questions are both to both shadow reporters regarding the European Parliament Turkey report. I think it is important to note that many of the detained people, in total around 80,000 and 50,000 are still in prison, have been arrested without any evidence to violence, even though they are charged with being a member or managing terrorist organization. No evidence to violence, I want to underline this. The only evidences, if there are any, are about their links to Gülen movement, such as their newspaper subscription, banks they deposited their money, schools their kids attended, or the companies they work for. My first question is, should there not be a direct reference to these arbitrary, out of rule of law detentions at European Parliament report next week? And the second question is, against Turkish criminal law that forbids the detention of pregnant women and new birth given women till babies are 6 months old, there are more than 700 babies in prison with their mothers. And also there are pregnant women too. Do you consider to raise this issue at the report? Do you consider to call for release of these women from the prison? Thank you.
I think I have to make a correction. I think we don't have any shadow reporters among the speakers as far as
I am
other than Mr. Hadjigeorgiou. Okay, then it's just for Mr. Hadjigeorgiou. Okay, let's try to get some answers and then we'll open the floor for. There are more questions. Okay, so could we just get the mic to the gentleman on the right side? So 3 questions so far.
Thank you. I'm from Ghent University, studying PhD on Turkish political system and media system. And I have 2 questions. Firstly, for Mr. Van Orden. And Van Orden mentioned that Turkey is an indigestible country for EU, so it's not very realistic for Turkey to continue in his path, in her path for the EU. But I just wonder, wasn't it obvious since the beginning Turkey was a huge country and it would be difficult to integrate? So I was wondering, are we living in a lie for last 20 years, or if so, can we talk about the reliability issue for EU? And for my second questions for Mr. Hadjigeorgiou, and Mr. Hadjigeorgiou also advised Turkey or Turkish people to ask what the future is for Turkey. But also I want to ask the same question to the EU, what is the future for EU? Because to me, as a young researcher, sometimes EU and Turkey relations seems to be trying to shoot a moving object on a horse, because also EU doesn't know what to do or where to go. Also Turkey doesn't know and has an identity issue, so it's very difficult to harmonize or synchronize together. So I don't know, what do you think about this kind of metaphor? Thank you.
I think 3 questions are good, so we can start.
Okay. I'm not sure I need a microphone. I think.
Well, please.
No.
Sorry. I think it's better for.
Is it?
Yeah,
okay.
please.
All right. Well, I addressed the question of will Turkey ever be a member, and in a way it relates to the last question as well. The European Union is built on a sort of myth, if you like. This whole idea of European political integration. And I think the relationship between Turkey and the European Union has been built on a myth as well, as has been suggested. The process of accession suits both sides. You know the old saying about better to travel than to arrive. Well, in this case, I don't think there will be an arrival. It's a constant process of travel. And for various reasons, which we could elaborate on, I mean, it suits both sides to do that. Is the European Union reliable? Well, the short answer to that, of course, is they're not. The European Union can change its procedures, it can be flexible when it wants to. As someone once said to me, in the European Union, everything's possible and nothing's possible. It just depends on whether or not it suits Berlin and Paris, basically. And that's precisely the problem that we are encountering over the Brexit negotiations. So, one has to be realistic. Don't believe the propaganda. Be realistic and just look at the reality. You talked about the human rights issue, and of course that is a matter of concern. You're quite wrong to say this has been omitted from the Turkey report. There are extensive paragraphs in the Turkey report on precisely this particular issue. I mean, I've got paragraph 2 in front of me, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. I mean, there are pages of the report devoted to precisely the point that you're raising. So whatever criticisms one may have of the report, it isn't the particular one that you're raising.
All right, Mr. Georgiou.
Well, yes, I think on the same line that the report, especially on the issue you raised, it's very, very hard and harsh towards Turkey, very tough. Of course, someone can say it could be much more tougher, but there is no end to that. Unfortunately, there is no end even on the abuses we see in Turkey. So we were talking about that, let's say, maybe more than 3 hours, and we came to that conclusion, I mean, to this paragraph. And I think that it is a strong message towards Turkey. Secondly, on the other question, which is the main question in the room, what is the future between Turkey and European Union? I think that there is no answer. That's why both sides decide to keep the path open, the line open, and because they know that they cannot see the end of that road, but they want both sides to stay on that road. And even me, I don't believe that it was easy to change this decision. But I want to add something on the other main issue, which is the size of Turkey, which make a lot of people in European countries to feel unsafe or to fear the entering of Turkey. I think that if European Union was a federation, then this problem would be solved in a way. In a federation, we maximize the power of smaller countries and we minimize the power of bigger countries. That is the main element of a federation. So that means 2 houses, upper house and lower house. In the upper house, every member state could have the same number of MEPs, let's say 5 from each country, which means that 35 and Malta have 5 and Slovenia and so on, and Germany, and on the lower house, according to the population. We could elect the President of Europe, and in that case we should see how we can increase again the power of a country which is a small one to have the same amount of voters as as a bigger country. Let's give an example. Greece, for example, to have the same amount of voters as Poland. This is something they do in the United States. A state which has 20 million people has the same number of senators as a state which has just 2 million people. That is the main the main instrument within federation. Since European Union is not a federation, we have on the table the problem we try to avoid, but we will never avoid it.
Before we just give floor to Ms. Lambert, I think Mr. Van Orden would like to reflect what you just said.
I'm not sure whether Takis is actually advocating this integrated or federal model that he's talking about with upper and lower house. I mean, this is precisely the thing which many people are so concerned about, this particular direction of travel, and this false comparison between the development of the European Union and the founding of the United States. Founding of the United States. The United States, I mean, it all came out of, if you like, one womb. You had a number of states in the United States, all founded basically by the British, and they were English speaking. They all came out, they had the common rule of law. I mean, they all came out of the same womb. Here you're talking about 28 sovereign states, each of whom has enormous differences in terms of language, population, history, relationships, all of these things. So this is another of these false comparisons that the European Union likes to make, as if somehow or other it is yet another sort of United States in creation. But the comparison is totally false, it's totally bogus. And I think people will, in any case, reject this whole idea.
Ms. Lambert, would you like to reflect to what
Yes.
Ms. van Bergen put forward?
Yes, I'm a technician, not a politician, so I'm not going to get into the formation of the EU, other than to say that in relation to Turkey, which is what we're here discussing, of course the EU is a political construct, which is the answer to your question. But I would also reflect only from empirical observation, it's an extremely flexible model. Smaller views are represented. In the case of Turkey, the view of Cyprus in particular, given everything that's going on, it is well reflected in discussions amongst the member states. So I take issue that the member states reflect only the French and German position. However, more specifically, you asked whether it could ever become a member, and I think in a way I answered that at the very beginning. I mean, it's up to member states. Of course, the political situation is changing all the time. Right now, it is indeed the case that there is great preoccupation about the human rights record in Turkey. But I also urge you to look at Turkey's strategic position, and as I've said, the strategic relationship is important. And I think also, and it's the point I tried to make at the beginning, direction of travel can be important. These institutional frameworks are very useful for both sides to continue discussing issues of policy importance, and that, you know, even spheres like energy, decarbonisation, renewable energy, transport, road safety, really sort of nitty-gritty things. There is a relationship and these things are discussed, and I think that's also useful. So maybe, you know, we can look a little closer than the big issue.
Before giving the floor to Mr. Aktar, I would like to ask again if anyone has a question, because we could have two more questions.
Well, I just would like to...
If it is too short,
very short.
All right.
Mr. Hadjigeorgiou already answered to my question for me and for my own... well, I can say for his statement that we can have hope towards the accession of Turkey if European Union will reform itself, assuming that the idea of preservation will become reality, because you know that he proposed a kind of renewal of Europe, accompanied by the organization setting up a conference by the end of 2019. So it might be, well, we might hope that, well, Europe will be reformed and there will be some hope. Because if we want to have a long-standing relationship with Turkey, we need to also to be a very serious partner. We cannot every time make a lot of promises and have a very deep discussion on immigration, on judicial reform, the effect of rule of law, if we are not serious about this future, about this accession. So we need to be a reliable partner towards Turkey. I think it's my own opinion.
All right. All right, thank you so much. I want to now just provide the floor for Mr. Aktar, Professor Aktar. Before I just give you the floor, Mr. Aktar, many in Turkey and outside Turkey argue that the problem in Turkey is not only about, I can give you this later on. Okay. Many in Turkey and outside Turkey argue that the problem we have in Turkey is not only about the authoritarian practices by the executive branch, but also its lack of opposition. And when I say opposition, I refer to both political opposition, but also civic opposition. Could you tell us why the opposition in Turkey in general cannot act together? What is the problem and how we can overcome this massive challenge, I would say?
Thank you, Mr. Isik. This is a $1 million question. I think I will give you some details on how to grasp this $1 million question. It's a timely meeting. Thank you for it. I used to come very often to Brussels once upon a time, but I come less and less because the very issue that we are trying to tackle, the candidacy and the future membership of Turkey is less and less a reality. I think we can safely and reasonably talk about post-candidacy today, and the new euphemism for it is the strategic partnership. It used to be a formula which was pronounced some time ago. Now it's back in the picture. I think the strategic partner, it's a beautiful euphemism, and it's full of cooperation areas. You also mentioned them in your presentation, like migration, energy cooperation, trade, fight against terrorism. These are the four main topics which fill this so-called strategic partnership. So I would like to go very briefly through the substance of these four issues and to see where this strategic partnership and cooperation stands on these four methods. I mean, the EU's efforts are obvious, they are visible. There are three hot Turkey friends in the Commission: Mrs. Mogherini, Mrs. Bulc, and Violeta Bulc, and Mr. Avramopoulos, for obvious reasons, because they perfectly fit with these four topics which are supposed to fill the strategic partnership. I mean, when I talk about strategic partnership, it's in the official documents, by the way. I mean, it's in the 18 months work plan of the council now. I mean, starting 1st of January, which runs until 30th of June 2020. It doesn't talk about enlargement. It doesn't talk about. It says Turkey is a candidate country and it's a strategic. It has its strategic importance. Why we are not translating this de facto situation where the membership negotiations are not, proceeding? Why we are not translating this into a de jure stop or of the negotiation? Why? I think there are 5 reasons to it. The first one, in the European political culture, there is no rupture. I mean, Europeans don't like ruptures. they don't want to say, okay, this is over, go home, it's finished. They still want to continue to talk, which is understandable. It's a political culture. It's like this, and it's perfect. The second one, it's exactly like Brexit. I mean, we don't know in Europe how to deal with a failure of a candidacy. We don't know that. Exactly like we don't know how to deal with a country who was a member and who wants to get out of it. Like that's the case of the UK. The same for Turkey. It didn't happen since 1973. Since the first enlargement, there was no failure. This is a failure, and we don't know how to deal with it. These are the two, I would say, political-philosophical reasons why we cannot translate this into de jure, stop and end of the negotiations. But there are three other very substantial reasons. The first one is strategic. Turkey is part of the free world, the so-called free world, since 1945, and the membership of the EU is part and parcel of this relationship. And I think the Europeans don't want to add oil to the ongoing fire with NATO and cut the ties under the EU relationship. So they still want to keep Turkey within the framework of this so-called old free world, which is also understandable, and showing nervousness to Turkey's other alternative strategic choices towards its northern neighbor. The second one is we can fit within this framework of NATO and strategic real strategic partnership, the fight against terrorism. So, frankly, how much Turkey cooperates in on the fights against terrorism? It's everywhere in UN documents and non-governmental organizations documents that ISIL, ISIS, Daesh, whatever, goes through and comes and goes through Turkey. This is the Turkish cooperation on this matter is very, very recent. We should face this reality. Which cooperation against terrorism, really? The second, or actually the fourth reason why the Europeans are nervous to cut the ties is tactical. It's this migration deal of the 18th of March 2016. So how it works? Does it work? Of course it does. Compared to the figures of 2015, it works. But we shouldn't forget that the flows continue towards Greece, and not in big numbers, but they continue. Moreover, there are Turkish refugees now. And Turkish refugees, where do they come from? They leave, they escape Turkey because of the de-democratization of the country. Turkey is not just an authoritarian country, it's a totalitarian country. When you talk about authoritarianism, it's just one-way street. There is the group of rulers which are authoritarian. No, the Turkish population, at least 50% of the Turkish population agree with what the regime does. So that has consequences on the asylum seeking, and people continue and will certainly continue to come to Europe. So Europeans may need another deal, really, with Ankara there. Not to mention the very fact, the migration theory, that people, if they don't feel comfortable somewhere, they will be tempted to leave that place, be it their own country or their first country of asylum. So Syrians, how much future they have in Turkey, that's another question. And finally, and this is the big chunk, I will try to keep it short, the economic interests. There are 22,000 EU companies working and making money in Turkey, out of which 7,000 German companies, This is the top, around 3,500 Dutch companies, etc. The investment stock, the FDI stock in Turkey is around 180 billion euros, out of which 75% are from EU. But it's not just the companies. The financial flows continue to Turkey. The financial flows from all IFIs, but also the European institutions, namely the European Investment Bank. So the EBRD is also very active. They have a stock of 30 billion. The World Bank, of course, is an old partner of Turkey. The two national development agencies, the French Agence Française de Développement has a portfolio of around 2 billion, and of course the Credit Anstalt für Wiederaufbau it has around 5 billion investment portfolio in Turkey. I'm not talking about IPA, because IPA is not dispersed. Only 10% of the IPA is for the 2013-2020 cycle. But all the others, including also the Council of Europe's Development Bank, by the way. So altogether, these financial flows continue to be to arrive in Turkey. There is a dilemma there. This is a I will tell you why. Because we are still working on the assumption that Turkey will become one day an EU member. These flows continue towards Turkey because of this assumption. But the dilemma is, as long as they continue towards Turkey, don't worry, they continue, they not strengthen, but I mean they ensure the longevity of the regime. This is the big dilemma. I mean, it's good to make money in Turkey, of course, but we should never forget that these flows help the regime to sustain and to continue, because the other sources are getting much more scarce. So, as for the energy cooperation, which is another topic within the strategic partnership, frankly, we shouldn't forget about Nabucco, which was a failure. The Russian proposal of South Stream against Nabucco was also a failure. Now we are talking about the Turkish stream, and this has nothing to do with Europe. As my friend Takis has mentioned, the Eastern Mediterranean deal, Turkey is not part of it, and actually doing everything not to be a part of it. So which energy cooperation? I really wonder. So what do we have at hand? And I finished there. And of course, I'm not talking about BDS, far from it. BDS, boycott, disinvestment and sanctions. I'm not talking about this, but we should really know and understand and name properly what are we dealing with when it comes to the Ankara regime. I think we should think reasonably for an STA, a free trade agreement, an FTA with Turkey, and we should be very selective when it comes to the aims of this huge financial flows towards Turkey. I'm not talking about severing the ties, but I think we should know with whom, I repeat, we are dealing when we talk about Turkey-EU relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aktar. Stephen, I want to also ask you, what kind of impact do you think we might have on Turkish democracy or on Turkish politics in general, if and when the accession are suspended? That's my first question. And secondly, what kind of wind of change should we expect following, vis-à-vis Turkey, of course, following the European elections in May 2019.
Thank you, Ebubekir. I will weave my answers to your two questions in my short introduction. But first, I would like to thank you and Vocal Europe for inviting me. I'm very happy also for Professor Aktar having rebalanced the debate to where we should be having it. This is not, a fight about, a federalist pipe dream of creating a European superstate. This is about creating a functional relationship based on realities, both within the European Union, which we'll never attain, even if Mr. Macron, writes a beautiful op-ed in every newspaper. The type of, institutional upgrade that he desires, let alone a superstate. And at the same time, Turkey, and in its search for identity, which we haven't talked about, and frankly, you are in a better position to answer your first question, really, than I am, Ebubekir, will have to define that bilateral relationship. First, as a proper academic, the answer to the question that you pose in the blurb and in your title is, of course, that yes, the two parties should remain connected. And I think Professor Aktar has beautifully unpacked, the four major elements that could compose this strategic partnership that is in the offing. Are the local elections, which are upcoming, the last chance basically for the political opposition to take a stand against an autocratic regime? Frankly, again, you're in a better position there to answer it. My inclination would be to say no to that, because we have moved beyond autocracy. I wouldn't use the word totalitarianism myself, but we are beyond autocracy in this sense, certainly with the implementation of the constitutional amendment package, which has concentrated, of course, powers around the presidency and has completely blurred the separation of powers with the other branches, and especially the judiciary. Had the opportunity for 5 years training almost every hakimevi around Turkey, Turkish judges and prosecutors. And I'm afraid that many of those are now actually dismissed, or even worse, in jail. I think the decision of Ahval to call for a formal suspension of the accession process is the right signal, even if it's long overdue. And I agree with the Commission representative that it is, of course, up to the Member States to take that step. The Commission can only implement the mandate that it has been given up until now, even if I think that it could apply negative conditionality much stronger beyond IPA funding cuts, so as to steer the Member States in the direction of keeping up credibility of the EU enlargement policy itself, if not the European Union in its strategic posture towards the neighbourhood. It's been mentioned before, the accession process has been dysfunctional for years. A de facto freeze with the kind of obstacles that remain, and Cyprus was already mentioned as the main one, whereas the first one perhaps, will not unblock this, unless a solution is found, and it seems to be further away than ever. Instead of clinging on to this functional enlargement process, which hampers the development, I think, also of the strategic partnership along the 4 lines that were sketched out. I think it would be both parties would be helped if we would remove this central obstacle to moving forward in what is indeed to be a more transactional relationship. And in fact, escape routes have already been found. The Turkey deal was mentioned. Sure, it is worthy of an upgrade, so to speak, especially if we now have a situation where Turkish nationals are fleeing their own country and seeking asylum within the European Union. Same on migration and visa liberalization, which remains a dream as long as anti-terrorism legislation in Turkey is not changed. And unless, of course, real constitutional reform restores the fundamental rights which the Turkish state and government have signed up to as a member of the Council of Europe. And so I refer to the recent Parliamentary Assembly resolution largely on the political opposition and the diminishing role of the political opposition as a result of the clampdown on their political and individual rights. And indeed, in a wider rethink of the EU's relations with its neighbouring countries, Brexit does play a role. Soon the European Union will have 3 strategic neighbours, Britain as the most integrated one, for now at least, Turkey, both are moving in or energized by forces which move the countries away from the European Union, and Ukraine, which is likely to remain in limbo for the foreseeable future. As the map of the European neighbourhood changes, I think the European Union should strategically rethink its relations with its neighbours and not be caught in an institutional sense by the type of frameworks that we have in place at the moment. Not just the bodies and institutions that guide the EU-Turkey relationship, but the enlargement policy writ large, the European neighbourhood policy writ large, and in that context, of course, the European Economic Area Agreement comes into sight again. I think it's a high time that the Commission, probably in its recompositioned form, takes a hard look at, and a more strategic look at the neighbourhood in the wider sense. My main point, therefore, is that we should not be blindsided or blinded rather by throwing up dust, that deflects attention away from where we should be focusing it, which is on the bilateral relationship itself and the nature of our intentions, the adherence to the commitments that both parties have entered into, and for Turkey, that is first and foremost, of course, the political criteria of Copenhagen. For the EU, it has a duty to live up to its own rules, apply them consistently in its enlargement process, so as not to debase that enlargement policy towards Balkan states, and if I may add, towards its own members, where, of course, rule of law issues are at stake as well. So a lot of credibility is at stake, and I'm afraid that if we just continue muddling through as the member states and the Commission are doing at the moment, we're not getting anywhere. So I'm fully endorsing the European Parliament's or the Ahval position, and I hope that it will get the full support when the vote comes to the plenary.
Sure, please, if you want to reflect.
Yeah, I'm going to have to leave very shortly, but just if I may make a couple of comments. I mean, first of all, I don't agree with the position taken in the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament. We've already heard from one of our colleagues here that the European Union apparently doesn't like ruptures. Well, this is the sort of rupture that is very unhelpful. It sends altogether the wrong signal. I mean, I think the thing we have to recognise that in any democracy, and however you look at a democracy, sometimes people elect governments which others are uncomfortable with. And sometimes people take decisions which others are uncomfortable with. And that is a fact of life. I've just had one comment. We heard about FDI flows into Turkey. I mean, the fact is, the market is a very good judge, and FDI flows indicate confidence in the future of a particular country and investment in it, because otherwise people aren't going to risk their money. And therefore I think there is far more confidence in the Turkish state than a lot of people have suggested.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. van Orden. I would like to open the floor for questions, particularly for Mr. Aktar and for Mr. Steven Blockmans. If you have any question, please raise your hand.
May I?
Of course, Mr. Hadjigeorgiou, please. To whom do you have a...
To my friend Cengiz. How can we perceive the demands coming from people within Turkey who oppose strongly Erdogan and his regime, asking us to keep Turkey on the track. And they are telling us, even a letter from Mr. Demirtas, some intellectuals, and they say that this somehow connection between Turkey and the European Union still give hopes to them that things will change one day. So that's something I cannot, it doesn't help me to finalize my answer to that, so I'm asking you. Thank you.
We should take more.
All right, we can of course take more questions if you have questions to Mr. Aktar and Mr. Blockmans. I am sure you would have.
This side.
Ah, all right. Okay.
I'm Takis. I'm a PhD researcher and policy advisor at the Office of Vice President Yarka. I'm from Greece, so the debate is about EU-Turkey relations. I keep focusing on some aspects that some people in Europe forget. And I really liked that many of the speakers said that we need to speak about realities and we need to speak about not pretending. So what I want to say is that we observed the last decades strategic military build-up from the side of Turkey. And we see that every week there is celebration of a new airplane, a new warship, of a new missile coming from the Turkish side. And the question is simple, which war Turkey is preparing to fight? Is there an enemy that's significant that Turkey needs to defend itself from? And how long we can pretend that we do not see that Turkey is preparing for a gunboat diplomacy? Is the EU ready to deal with this attitude? And is the EU ready not to think only the interests of maybe Greece or Cyprus, but the interests of France or Italy, that we see now they have a particular interest in the region given the gas exploitation? And it's a different thing to speak about EU-Turkey relations when you are in Brussels, and it's a different thing to do so when you are in a Greek island and you see F-16 jets passing above your head every day in order to avoid the radars from a low altitude.
Could you please wrap up if it is possible? Thanks.
And yeah, that's basically an open question.
I go ahead.
Please, Mr. Aktar.
Let's start with Takis' question. I mean, how to keep Turkey on the track and how to come to help the Turkish Democrats. It's another.
The question was, what can we say to them?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but fine. I mean, again, I mean, a dilemma. The same dilemma is there, but unfortunately, it just doesn't help to give the impression that Turkey is a negotiating candidate country. This is the official title, as we may know, and this is why Turkey has access to all these IFI funds, and by virtue of an old memorandum which dates back to the past enlargement. There is a talk in the Commission's paper where it revises the IPA funds of 18th of August last year to go for direct administration of funds and to concentrate them in Brussels, etc. I mean, this is definitely a formula. We don't need to keep Turkey, as a negotiating country to disperse and come to help to the Turkish Democrats. We don't need this. I I mean, quite to the contrary, actually. You know, someone mentioned that we should be able to give a strong, I think you did, a strong message, but then continue by other means to, you know, to come to help to the Turkish civil society for whatever it remains, by the way, and look for other formulas. But we should never forget that this is a technical issue. When it comes to the disbursement of these funds, without the knowledge of the authorities in Ankara, it won't work. And so unless the funds are dispersed out, you know, in Europe, through EED, etc., I mean, the European Endowment for Democracy, this is feasible. But if you want to help a Turkish NGO or a non-governmental body in Turkey, without the knowledge, especially now, without the knowledge of the regime, it just won't work. So this is another dilemma that we should deal with with the next commission and the next IPA, the IPA 3. But altogether, I think you know, we need a paradigm shift here. This is why I talked about the post-candidacy era. Because we all continue to think on how to keep it doesn't go that way. Same for Greece. I mean, this is very much related to when I talk to my friends in Greece, they are still in the 1998 Simitis Papandreou deal, which opened the way to the Turkish candidacy. They still think that Turkey is and will be in the future a good neighbor. This is over. You gave the details. This is over. I think Greece, like many other countries, should think about their plan B, C, D, and stop counting on a Turkey which one day will become a good boy and a good or a good lady to cooperate with its neighbors and its European partners. And the same applies to these IFIs. I mean, Van Orden left. I hope not for another Turkey meeting. He mentioned the FDI flows are a good indicator about the future of the country. First of all, the FDI flows are declining, but again, the paradigm is still the same. European companies like international and European financial institutions keep keep up with this paradigm that Turkey will become one day an EU member state. This is wrong. I mean, they need to revise all this, but these are all big bureaucracies. You see, it takes time for them to really shift to something else. Of course, they will understand when they will start to lose money. That's for sure.
Stephen, would you like to reflect on that?
It's a bit the dialogue of the deaf if people who throw up dust don't stay for the remainder of the debate. I cannot but agree with what has just been said. The contradiction in Mr. Van Orden's last point that the EU is wary of ruptures does not seem to apply to his position on Brexit. Frankly, it's not very convincing as a set of arguments. You asked me about the impact of the next European Parliamentary elections, which I failed to weave into my opening remarks.
Do you see a major shift, that's what I'm saying, vis-a-vis EU-Turkey accession negotiations?
No, I don't see a major shift. I mean, the shift is happening as we speak. AFET decided as it did, and we might see before the elections, a plenary vote. If that fails to pass, and if the predictions about the recompositioning of the European Parliament are correct, whereby the EPP loses a bit, the S&D loses majorly, whereas the ALDE maybe stays in place, Greens But the rise is on the right, and more coalition needs to be found between the three big party families. Then obviously the voices for a harsher position on Turkey will grow louder, and will force basically the vote that, if it doesn't happen before May 2019. What it will reflect also, of course, is the new composition of the European Commission, where we will see, no doubt, that populist governments around the European Union, usually anti-immigrant parties, more Eurosceptic parties, enlargement-wary countries will nominate commissioners in positions where they will tilt the balance within the college. And so the three proponents that you indicated, Professor Aktar, on Turkey within the European Commission might be replaced, and whatever remains of proponents for a strong EU-Turkey relationship might not be occupying those portfolios, which are determining the type of strategic partnership that we foresee.
I think Mr. Aktar,
yes, I would like to add something. You had a first, before giving me the floor, you had a very pertinent question, but I would like to address it. What is happening to the Turkish opposition? That was basically your carry.
If I may just intervene,
yes.
I want to just add one personal note. I think 2 years ago, one of the group in the European Parliament would like to provide a platform where they could, gather some members of certain Turkish opposition, both political but also civic. And I remember different personalities that belongs to the so-called camps and Turkish political opposition groups. They did not want to come together and speak at an event where they were going to speak their problems, their issues, but they did not. So my question is, why? What is the problem?
Turkey is run today by a grand coalition. And the grand coalition comprises all parties with the exception of the HDP, the Kurdish party. We should face this. Of course, they don't appear as such. CHP still pretends that they are in the opposition. The other E party pretends that they are still in the opposition. No, they are all parts and parcels of a grand coalition which is running the country now. It is exceptional. It never happened before. Before the Islamists, the political Islam was always kept out of it. Now they are in it. So I think when you ask about, so where is this opposition? The opposition is running the country. Look at the CHP. The CHP is so-called social democrats. They have never been. This was always a party which was close to the state. Actually, they were the builders of the state with the Kemalists. And now they are, the helpers and the supporters directly sometimes, but indirectly, definitely, of the regime. Their candidates for these so-called local elections, which have nothing to do with any local elections, or for the matter, any decentralization or local governance or whatsoever. They are general elections, and they have candidates which can perfectly be the candidates of the ruling AKP. So I think if today in Turkey there is a Kurdish opposition and there is a liberal opposition which is completely pushed around, especially now with what is happening to Osman Kavala and all the others. The nascent and the embryonic Turkish liberal civil society is being completely wiped out, and I don't think that this will, they will come again in a foreseeable future, because these people are leaving. Turkey is facing a huge brain drain that we should never forget. And when we talk about the future relations with Turkey, to whom we address, etc., we should think that way, that these people are out. It's like the Spanish opposition after when Franco took over, and several other cases in Central and Eastern Europe after 1945.
All right, thank you so much. Now I would like to open the floor for Q&A to all panelists, not only for Mr. Blockmans and Mr. Aktar, but for every... Okay, there is one here at the end of the row, please.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's right.
Okay, from Barcelona, freelance political analyst. And following this last talk from Mr. Aktar, all the discussion has been revolving around the figure of Erdogan, of course, because he's the head of the system, no? And he's the main decision maker. So for the floor and for the Turkey experts here, does the Commission, the EU, and anyone in Europe has a plan for post-Erdogan scenario?
So this question is also to Mr. Hadjigeorgiou and Ms. Lambert as well, right?
Also everybody here.
Okay,
I think there's a lot of legitimate voices in this floor. So.
All right. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the lady at the back.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm from United Nations Office for Refugees. I'm the wife, and I'm having a question for Mr. Aktar. You talked about the Turkey EU deal of 16th March 2016 and the continuous flow that we know is arriving on the Greek islands unlimitedly, including Turkish citizens. You mentioned the idea of having another deal.
It was not me.
Okay. I thought I heard that, so I was wondering. But how do you see the future of this deal, this €6 billion deal? When does it end? What are the consequences 3 years down the line? And your thoughts about it?
Any other question? Where? All right. Okay.
So, my name is Belgin. I'm from EUTurkey, and I'm working for a project related to Turkey. It's called Turkey-EU Business Dialogue. And there was some speaker that mentioned about the high-level dialogue that was organized last week in Istanbul. So we talked about the cutting, funding, IPA, everything, but this project is still continuing. We have started it in 2018 July. It will last like 30 months. And with this platform, I think Sarah was saying it's very important to come on platforms like this and discuss about Turkey, EU, the private sector, economy, everything actually. So in this platform, actually, we are discussing the problems with Turkey. The private sectors that comes from Turkey and EU, they come in the same platform in Turkey and in the EU. And last week we had the EU high-level meeting in Istanbul. So what I would like to say, in this 25 months more it will last, and we will have lots of activities, and there will be still 2 high-level dialogues, which all the parties are included, the engineer, EU delegation, Euro chambers, Turkish private sector, EU private sector. I just want to make a comment like, okay, we know the relations are bad, but this is a platform where we try to bring the voice of the EU
Could you
and
please
Turkish
wrap up a little bit if it is possible?
Yeah, private sector together. And my question was, last week we had this high-level dialogue, and when we raised again that the modernization of the custom unions is very important, and the President of EUTurkey raised this to Kaytanan and to Al-Bayrak in Turkey. And we would like to focus on this, the modernization of the custom unions.
Okay.
Thank you.
If there is no any other question, I would like to give the floor first to Ms. Lambert and then Mr. Hadjigeorgiou to reflect the question that were put forward.
Yes, I think your question was if we have a plan post-Erdogan, and we don't frame things in that way. I mean, currently we are working with the existing authorities in Turkey to try and ensure that those areas where we're particularly concerned, I think everybody here is talking about human rights. I mean, we raise that at every single opportunity. And we are focused on trying to see progress within that framework, I think. So, always in EU matters, your dialogue or your counterparty is the governing party at the moment. Okay, that's how we work. On Eurochambers, yes, indeed, there was a high-level economic dialogue that was extremely useful. And on the customs modernisation, union modernisation, I mean, the Commission is on the record as saying that we think this is a win-win for both sides. the mandate, as somebody else explained, the mandate comes from member states. And so we come back to the beginning, which is member state attitudes towards Turkey.
Mr. Hadjigeorgiou, would you like to?
No, I want to say just one word on the customs union modernization, on which issue I think that the European Union replace the dream of Turkey to enter Europe to the customs union modernization, which in my opinion is the same thing. It's like taking from someone the bread and at the same time you give to him the oven. I believe that for Turkey the modernization of the customs union is the highest thing they can achieve. So what some European countries are doing is to give to Turkey what really Turkey needs and some European country needs, and they put aside the dream of entering Europe. But for me, it's something which some countries will not support, especially Cyprus will not do so, since Turkey don't implement the current customs union agreement towards all member states, meaning even Cyprus Republic.
Thank you so much. Stephen, would you like to reflect to some of the questions?
Well, there was no direct question to me, but
there was one to the panel, which I think includes you as well. So
yeah, sure. But I wanted to make another point in what I think is this final round. It is up to the European Parliament really to push quite hard at this stage, for a strategic rethink in EU-Turkey relations. If the European Commission is recompositioned, it will have a strong say in grilling basically the future, the nominate for the enlargement portfolio, which I think will not be carved off, from the European neighbourhood portfolio, will also not transform into kind of membership portfolio, which deals with both entry and exit issues, but will be, and I hope will be a continuation of the DG NEAR type of approach which the European Commission has. But if the strategic rethink doesn't happen at that stage, the European Commission will essentially be recompositioned along the lines and with the type of policy that we have now. So the European Parliament ought to really, I think, hammer this message home quite firmly now.
Mr. Aktar,
yes.
If you could get your last words, because we are running out of time. We have just 5-6 minutes.
Really? Okay.
Yes, we have to finish at 11:50 if you don't mind.
Okay.
So, thank you so much.
Okay. Regarding the post-Erdogan, question, of course, no one has a plan, including Turks. No one in the world has a post-Sisi plan either. You see. So or post-Putin plan. They don't. And so, as for the March 2016 deal, I don't think it's revisable because on the Turkish side, they would, Ankara would ask for the heaven, and I think it will be status quo ante, which will continue really. Regarding this, the good work of the business community, I think really we should, we should come down to the earth. Katainen was in Ankara, and he had a press conference with the son-in-law of President Erdogan, who happens to be the minister in charge of the economy. German journalists were not allowed to follow the press conference. We cannot just talk, about nice things, about the Turkish business, etc., without paying attention to the rule of law in general. Because if there is no rule of law, there is no, economic freedom either. And I would like to remind the audience that Turkey is a champion of the deaths in the workplace in Europe, and the reason is very simple, because the Turkish business community is against all rules which pertain within the social policy to the workplace security. And they keep delaying it, and the chapter on the social policy was openable years ago. Ankara always refused to open the social policy chapter. So I think what we should understand is that Van Orden used a good formula, continuing to travel without arriving. I mean, this is definitely the position of Ankara, because they like the way things proceed, because they don't like the idea of the European norms, standards, principles, and especially values to come and disrupt the way they rule the country. I think this, the examples that I have given regarding the death in the workplace, it is very typical. I mean, they don't care about the security of the workers. They just want to continue to make money. Unfortunately, it's not the way it should be done. And Katainen, protested for this poor German journalist of ZDF, etc. But of course, no avail. They should. This is Turkey, and it will be so. And if you are not happy, you go. I mean, that was the answer of the son-in-law in front of Katainen. So I think one last word on this customs union. You know, the customs union formula, or the myth, actually, it's a mythology. The customs union has been designed between 1993 and 95 as a step towards membership. We should never forget this. So if the membership is not happening and won't be happening, the customs union is and will be caduc. And this is exactly what is happening now. Now the Turkish side, for instance, is talking about the agriculture and the services to be included in the customs union. What's the point? If you want to include the agriculture policy requirements within the customs union, you go for the membership and apply the agricultural acquis communautaire. Why you are asking for the customs union deal to include the agriculture? No, I think we don't have time, but I think it's in the best interest of the Turkish business community to concentrate on a new free trade agreement. This is the best they may get from Europe. Europeans have interest in Turkey, they have invested in Turkey, etc. But this is, I don't see any other feasible option in a foreseeable future. Thank you, Ebubekir.
Well, that being said, thank you so much. I think we're running out of time. I have to close the panel. On behalf of Vocal Europe and also my colleagues who really did a lot to organize this event, thank you so much for all coming. And I would like to kindly invite you for a family photo in front of the stage, if you don't mind. It will take several minutes, don't worry about it. Thank you so much for coming.